right, well, let's welcome up Hutch.
Appreciate it. If you have a Bible, guys, be making your way over to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew is the first book in the New Testament. Chapter 20 is our text for this morning. While you're finding your way over there, there was a doctor, a lawyer, a pastor, and a little boy who were all on this small chartered airplane. Plane took off fine, reached cruising altitude, and all of a sudden there was some instrumentation issues. The pilot got very concerned, did the best he could as quickly as he can to diagnose the problem, and all of a sudden he realized this plane is terminal, it's going down. So he grabs a parachute, he turns around to the rest of the people there, the rest of those men, he says, guys, it's every man for himself. There's only 3 more parachutes on this plane, but I want you to know, you got to figure it out. I'm out. He jumps. Well, the doctor says, I save lives, therefore I'm going to save my life so that I can save others' lives. He grabs a parachute, he jumps out of the plane. The lawyer, he says, I'm the smartest man on this plane. He grabs a pack, out he jumps. The pastor was a little bit older, he looked at this young man. He says, son, I've lived a long life. God's been really, really good to me. Here, you take this last parachute and you jump to safety. Little boy looked up at him and said, sir, the smartest man in the plane just jumped out with my backpack on his back. Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 1. And we are told the purpose statement of this parable in the very first line in verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like. Jesus is about to give us an MRI, if you will, a snapshot, an x-ray, an insight into the kingdom, his kingdom. He's using this story to capture attention of those who were there that day. Jesus lived in an agrarian culture, so he oftentimes would use stories that related to farming and that kind of industry because that was a large part of the crowd. And he begins by saying these words, for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early. He went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Can you picture this? It's harvest time. He has limited opportunity to bring in the harvest. He needs help. So he goes out and hires day laborers. We understand what that is like. These day laborers, you have to understand, if they didn't work, they didn't eat. They didn't get paid. It wasn't a salaried position. And so they're standing gathered together, waiting to be offered the opportunity to go to work. After agreeing with the laborers, and that's important for us to understand, after agreeing with the laborers for a denarius, a day, he sent them into his vineyard. Now, denarius was an average working man's day's salary. It wasn't exorbitant, it wasn't cheap, it was average. It was what they got for a day's work. It was a just day's work. Verse 3, and going out about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right, I will give you. Now we got to stop for a second. The Jewish work day went from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So when it says that he went out a little bit later, this is about 9 a.m. Now, the group that he met with at 6 o'clock, he made an agreement with, a denarius for a day's work. However, at 9 o'clock, when he went out, he said, whatever is fair, I will pay you. They didn't have an agreement that said they would get a certain amount of pay. Keep that in mind, okay? Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. The 6th hour, 12 noon. The 9th hour, 3 in the afternoon. The day is speeding by. And about the 11th hour, or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You go into the vineyard too." And when evening came, 6 o'clock, the work bell whistle blew. The owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up unto the first." Now that wasn't extremely unusual, but it wasn't typical either. Normally the ones who had worked all day would be the first to be paid. They had been there the longest. But in this particular situation, the owner of the vineyard says, "I want you to bring up those who were hired last and pay them first. Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up unto the first." And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." Don't you like that they added that? Just in case you don't realize this, we've borne the burden of this hard, laborious day in the scorching heat. Just want to remind you, we were here at 6 a.m. These others, 5 p.m. But he replied to one of them, "Friend." The word friend there is not a best buddy. The word friend there is more of a casual acquaintance. It's a man who hired somebody to help him for the day. "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." So Jesus is telling this story. There's a landowner, and there's a couple of things that we know about this landowner. Number one, he's got a lot of work. And number two, he's got a lot of money. He is under pressure that he has to get the crops into the barns as quickly as possible. There is no time to waste. So at 6 o'clock, he goes out and he hires a group of men. At 9 o'clock, he goes back out. He sees some more there, and he says, "You know what? I could use some more help. You guys come and work with me." He made an agreement with what the pay would be for those hired at 6 a.m. At 9 a.m., he said, "I'll treat you right. You just trust me." And it was an act of faith on their part because they didn't have any guarantees what they would be paid. Then he goes out at noon and he sees that there are more workers that are available. So he hires them. He says, "Come into my field and work." And he does the same thing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then he goes out at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and he sees these guys. And he says to these guys, "Why are you still here?" And I don't think he was upbraiding them. I don't think he was chastising them or scolding them. He was simply asking, "Why are you still here?" And their answer to him was this: "Because no one has hired us to work." You know what I think about these guys? I think these were the guys who had been looked over all day long. Maybe they weren't the tallest. Maybe they weren't the youngest. Maybe they weren't the strongest. But the landowner needed help. And he extended a hand. And they came. And then, much to their surprise, 1 hour later, when the work bell whistle blows, they get their paycheck. They open it up. And inside that envelope is a full day's pay. Wait a second. Sir, there must be some sort of mistake. We've only worked 1 hour. Yeah, I know. But we don't understand. The master wants you to have it. And so immediately, here's what happens. Those that were hired earlier in the day take out their iPhone They start pushing the calculator button, and they start to figure for themselves, if these guys got a denarius for 1 hour, what in the world are we going to? We're going to get like 2 weeks worth of pay today. But then all of a sudden, when they received their envelope with great excitement, the line was long. They probably went ahead and called their wives and said, hey, listen, honey, you're not going to believe this. We're going to be able to take that vacation this year after all. They started spending that money before it even came in their mind. They had all these great ideas of where this money was going to go and what they were going to be able to do with it. And all of a sudden, they opened up the envelope. And much to their chagrin, there's 1 day's pay. That's what they agreed to. They should have been okay with it. But somehow or another, if you look at verse 10, what does it say in verse 10? It says, when those hired first came, listen to this, they thought they would receive more. They got what they agreed to. But in their mind, they begin to think to themselves, we're going to get more. And they started to grumble. And there's 2 things I want us to see this morning. First of all, I want us to see that grumblers are going to grumble. And then secondly, I want us to see the truth about God's grace. You got to do me a favor, guys. You got to listen spectacularly fast, okay? Here we go. The word grumble, it means to show one's unhappiness or a critical attitude, to make complaining remarks or noises under one's breath, to murmur or mutter in discontent, to complain. We know what that is, right? To grumble. Here's what takes place in the life of a grumbler. First of all, there was observation. They saw what those who were hired last got paid. Then there was expectation. Immediately, they began to assume that they would be paid more. That led to consternation. They couldn't believe what was happening, which ultimately led them to detonation. They blew up. What in the world do you think you're doing? You paid the guys who worked 1 hour the same as you paid us who bore the heat of the day. It's not fair. And these guys were grumbling and complaining, not at the other workers. They were grumbling and complaining at the landowner who they had agreed with and made this contract. And he upheld his end of the contract. We grumble against God for 2 basic reasons. Number 1, we overestimate our own importance. And number 2, we underestimate the grace of God. We grumble with God because number 1, we overestimate our own importance. And number 2, because we underestimate God's grace. So what is the truth about God's grace? Let me give you 4 thoughts. Number 1, God's grace is a gift. God's grace is a gift. It has been said that grace is God's riches at Christ's expense. And God extends his grace to whom he will, how he will, when he will. And the truth about grace is this. There is absolutely, positively nothing you can do to make God love you more. And there's absolutely, positively nothing you can do to make him love you less. That's grace. And like a gift, the only thing we can do with grace is receive it. Chris, if I had a gift here for you and it was wrapped up, what's your favorite color?
Red.
Red. I got red wrapping paper. I got a beautiful bow on this, and I say, to Chris from Hutch. And you look at that and you say, man, how'd you know my favorite color was red? And I would say, because I asked you. And you would look at this present, and that present is there. That present, if you don't open up this present, if you don't unwrap it, if you don't receive it, what good does that present do you? 0. It could be exactly what you need. It could be what you have always wanted. It could be everything that you have longed for. But if you don't unwrap it and if you don't receive it, it does you no good. And God's grace is the exact same way. The only thing we can do with grace is to receive it. Second truth about grace. This is good stuff, guys. I don't know if you realize it or not, but this is good stuff. Give me my phone back, by the way. Aren't you glad God doesn't do that with his grace? He doesn't pull it back. That was a little extra. It didn't cost you anything. Secondly, God's grace keeps us from feelings of inferiority. God's grace keeps us from feelings of inferiority. And again, you got to listen faster, okay? You got to snap with it. You got to go spray that WD-40 on those brain, those synapses, and let's go. I got a question for you this morning. I want you to stay awake with me, okay? What do you have that God needs? What do you have that God needs? Does he need your intellect? Does he need your influence? Does he need your income? No. God doesn't need any of those things. So you and I need to understand something about God's grace. Your confidence, your joy in this life should not be based on what you have or what you do. It shouldn't be based on the title on your office door. But your confidence and your joy in this life should be solely based on whose you are. I am a child of the King. And everything that my Father possesses is my inheritance. No matter what the enemy wants to throw at me, no matter how he wants to pull me down, no matter how he wants to destroy my life, he wants to affect my thoughts, he wants to hurt my body and my relationships. I am a child of the King, and what is his is mine. Third truth about grace this morning is God's grace levels the playing field. God's grace levels the playing field. I want you to notice something about these grumblers. When they grumbled, they didn't say, you have put us on par with the latecomers. What they said was, you have put the latecomers on par with us. And that does not seem good in our eyes. Another question. Do you ever put yourself above other people? Do you ever put yourself above other people? Does that roll through your brain? Does that show itself in how you live? Does that play out in the reality of your day-to-day? You see, the grumblers started comparing themselves with others, and that led to them coveting what others had. And that led to complaining about what they didn't have, which ultimately led to their criticizing, get this, the one who gave them all they had. They went from comparing to coveting to complaining to criticizing in a matter of moments. Guys, I want you to hear me this morning. Would you look at me? Eyeball to eyeball as best I can, every man in this room. Your sin doesn't smell any better than mine. And my sin doesn't smell any better than yours. Because all sin is an offense to the nostrils of a holy God. No matter how big we think the sin is or how small, we don't understand the holiness of God. Because all sin is an offense to a holy God. Fourth truth, then we're going to the tables. Thank you for listening fast. I tell you what, Ron, we should give everybody a pin, a plaque, a ribbon one day that says, world's best listener. Because that's who you are. How does it feel to be the best? You guys are amazing. Nobody's left. Nobody's crying. You're still here. You're still listening. And you're doing it fast. Fourth truth about grace. God's grace offers a fresh start. How many of you this morning have ever needed a fresh start in life? Got to be honest with you, I think every single double hand ought to be going up. I need a fresh start this morning. God's grace offers us a fresh start. Look at something with me. Turn back to chapter 19, one chapter ahead of where we just started reading. And I want you to look at the very last verse number 30, and listen to this. He's teaching a series of parables here, and what he says in verse 30 of Matthew 19 is this: but many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. Now go over to chapter 20 and verse 16 and look at what he says. So the last will be first, and the first last. He flip-flops it. And I think he does that for a reason. And the reason is, guys, because God's grace doesn't keep score. God's grace isn't about your effort, your ability. God's grace is about a fresh start. It's about when you've blown it. It's about when you've messed up. It's about when you are dead in your trespasses and sins. It is the grace of God that doesn't make bad people good. The grace of God is about making dead people alive. That's God's grace. His grace is amazing, and it is inexhaustible, and it's available to you today. Let's break to the tables, have some great discussion. We'll come back, wrap everything up in just a few minutes. C.S. Lewis was an atheist. He was a philosopher, a thinker. But in his short autobiography, Surprised by Joy, he tells the story of how his wife, whose name was Joy, led him to faith in Jesus Christ. In his book, he asks the question, why did I wait so long? Why did I allow myself to be so deceived? Why did I think I was missing out if I converted? But then he says, I was surprised by joy. I think there's going to be one contest in heaven. Say, Hutch, what are you talking about? It's not going to be a contest of who got there because they deserved it more. Because Ephesians 2:8-9 is very clear. For by grace you're saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's not of works so that no one could boast. Heaven would cease to be heaven if we could earn our way there. Because you would always be able to find somebody that you had done just a little bit more than and deserved it a little bit more, and then you'd always be able to find somebody who, to be quite honest, did a little bit more than you. And then you would lose that joy. But I do think there's going to be one contest. And this is just holy imagination. It's not scripture. I think the contest will be when you and I in heaven look back on this life and we see the pit from which he brought us, the depths of depravity from which he redeemed us, the difficulties that he saw us through. And I think the contest will be, who will sing his praise the loudest? And so what I'd like to do today is warm up just a little bit. Printed in your notes for today is a familiar old hymn. And I remember the very first time I went to a Promise Keepers event at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. And however many thousands, 40, 60, whatever it was there that day. And we stood and we sang and we recognized and we realized that it was his hand that reached down low, 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 low. As low as you could possibly go. And he picked you up. And he set you beside him. And that place rocked. And what I'd like to do is just a little bit of warm-up session today. Is I would like to raise the roof of Cabernet. I would like to rock the rafters just a little bit. I would like to see us, you and me, shake the chandeliers. I would like for the throne of heaven today to stop what is going on and say, hey, somebody down there has realized God's amazing grace has lifted them up and set them on high. Would you sing with me today to the glory of God? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. You're doing good, but we're going to get better. Listen to this. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. That saved a wretch like me. I once was lost. I once was lost, but now I'm found. But now
One Thing for Men meets at Cabernet Steakhouse in Alpharetta, Georgia on Friday mornings from 7 to 8 a.m. If you live in the Atlanta area or visit the area on Friday, we would love to have you join us in person. And if you have been blessed by this message, please consider supporting One Thing for Men online.